Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blue Fletch Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast. Today I'm joined by Richard Makerson. We're doing a recap of Modex 2024. So Richard, I know this is the first year Blue Fletch was presenting at Modex, and we had a booth. We're talking through a lot of the SSO signing stuff, but I know you and I spent a lot of time walking the floor, talking to partners and some of the other vendors. Wanted to cover some of the things today that we thought stood out for either new or different from previous Modexes or ProMats. And then also we have a couple things we noticed that were absent, and we wanted to talk about those and call those out as well. So I guess just to get us started, I think the big theme of Modex that you and I talked about as we did our recap was robots. So I know there were the categories of robots. Maybe you can talk about the different categories we saw, and then some of the interesting things you saw from that's either new or different from previous ones.
Yeah, so I know we've joked around in the past about this being a robotics conference and shouldn't be like a materials handling conference, but we're seeing the industry and space mature. So from a robotics standpoint, of course, you have your robotic arms, right? Big arms, small arms, how do I lift heavy packages, help sort. The interesting thing we saw this year were vertical racking robots. So I can attach them to racks and they can climb and pick things off of shelves. I remember one company looked almost like a spider going through all the different racks. I was really surprised to see inventory drones there. I know
in their protective cages.
Yeah, I know it'd be hard to display at a conference, but it was like batting cages for drones.
Flying robots. What can go wrong?
Yeah. I'm interested to see how that'll play out just because of the complexity, like of having a drone inside. Do you care about noise? Like, how do you deal with light? Oftentimes when you run a robot, you might turn down the lights to save power because there's nobody else in that facility. A lot of self-driving vehicles and forklifts, so a much more increase of use around LiDAR and being able to map and know presence. So it could be small palletized size drones that are able to get next to a pallet, scoop it up, or drive under a rack or shelf and move it around, but also like for picking. So just to have those different shelves. Of course, you had your different vacuum grip robots.
Arms, a lot of arms.
I know, a little octopus just suctioning cardboard boxes. And one of the things that you called out was just a lot of floor charging.
Yes, as we put robots in their self-driving, and the biggest thing is just how do you charge? This is the problem everybody has a Tesla electric car runs into after you get to 240 miles and you look your range, how much you got left. But it's these warehouses run 3 shifts a day, or manufacturing facilities run 3 or 4 shifts a day. How do they actually keep robots up and running? And I think one of the things was when the robot's not in use, charging on the floor, so it just rolls over, so you don't have to have a guy swapping batteries like the old fork trucks and that type of model.
And I think it'll help out with interoperability as well, right? So I don't have to have this custom one-off docking solution that only works for this robot or only works for this series of robots. You can have a charging infrastructure and pick and choose what's right for your organization. And the last one I called out were worker robots that specifically could do some level of customer service. I forget the name of the company, but we saw a couple of these where you had a robot. It was working on a task, whether it was sorting, picking, but it knew when a human walked up, to stop and engage, right? Ask you how you're doing. I think one of the robots would give you a dap. You could ask it a question and then it would go back to doing what it's doing. So it feels like that was, in my opinion, pretty bleeding edge, because now you're kind of going beyond a robot, you're going beyond a cobot, and now a robot that, you're bringing in that human element that you would typically get from, an associate.
I think to your point, the interaction with humans is big for me. So when I think about, robots are going to take your jobs, a lot of times they're difficult to staff certain jobs in warehouses. Nobody wants to run the graveyard shift. So a lot of this is, how do I have something that can augment the workers, employees, and actually make their job better? The things they don't want to do, how do we have a robot do that? So like the automated fork truck you don't have to have a guy standing on the lift. It'll go up there and go pick off a 3-story shelf without having to have somebody on it. So I think it's interesting to me to think about how the actual experience of the employees is going to be different. You're still going to have employees, but it's going to, how do you make that better and improve it with robotics?
Yeah, and I think the nugget in there is, organizations need to be thinking about what's next for your associate. So as some monotonous tasks like come off their plate, I know the easy thing for the bean counters is to remove that resource, but like how do you level up that resource and go deeper and further as far as innovation, market penetration with that human resource?
All right, so the next thing we noticed was there's a lot more, I guess exosuits was the big trend, talking about employee assist. So what do we see there? What was the big thing we saw with exosuits?
Yeah, I saw a good balance between exosuits that were powered or had motors versus exosuits that relied on pulleys and other mechanisms, but the goal still remains the same, right? Like how can you have a human resource lift a heavy object but make it as easy as possible? One for efficiency, reuse, but also reduce injury, right? Like that is very expensive and time consuming. When someone gets hurt, then you have to replace them. You will probably lost that productivity for that session, and then you're going to have some sort of potential payout, and sometimes even long-term payout. And so, as robots become more capable, how can we have humans work more efficiently, reduce injury at the same time?
I know you mentioned a lot of them are spring or pulley driven. Do you think that is just, from a maintenance cost, I know it's going to be a lot less, not having to worry about batteries. Do you feel like that's going to be the trend going forward for most people, and then really power is only really needed for certain situations?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the trade-offs. Like I'm not an exosuit shmee by any means, so knowing the difference, but I would say it's probably cheaper, easier to train, easier to get going. I don't have to worry about battery with springs and pulleys. You just put it on and you lift. And as long as you can put it on and know how to put it back, you reduce a lot of those ramp-up factors.
So, Richard, the next section we noticed was what I would call or categorized as vision products. A lot of this is whether it's LiDAR, as you mentioned before, or some of the newer camera and camera capture. But what did you see different? What are the things that stood out to you in regards to vision and whether it's devices or other things being able to see in the warehouse?
Yep. So the first piece of it is just more LiDAR, more cameras, simply because these robots need it to understand what's going on in their environment, for them to not run into people, to be able to pick up pallets. So just a lot more LiDAR, a lot more cameras, just for that simple aspect. The other piece of it is just to understand what it's doing. So can I see inventory? Can I read labels? Can I read pricing? Can I understand stockouts? And so for me, I think that there's going to be a bit of a convergence where you're seeing a lot of these proprietary AI models and offerings where you're going to have your larger players in the space, whether it's the Googles, the Microsofts, whoever, start to incorporate some of those pieces where you don't have to build them completely from scratch, but also lay the foundation where a lot of the innovative companies can still have those proprietary models that may be necessary for solving certain use cases.
And I guess, how are they going to handle that in the warehouse? I know one of the things you and I have talked about in the past is lack of bandwidth and network connectivity. A lot of these warehouses, manufacturing facilities, especially in the ones that are not necessarily in cities, but how are the big vendors going to solve for that data processing and push it to the edge, whether NVIDIA devices or TPUs, like remote TPUs? What might that look like?
Yeah, I think pushing to the edge is going to be a big factor. Even with like private LTE, it's still huge amounts of data to process. Sometimes these robots are collecting hundreds of gigs of data per hour. So being able to process that, whether it's in the warehouse and the warehouse has a set of GPUs, or you have something like the Jetson box from NVIDIA that's part of the robot where you can process models and only send up the output of that processing. So you keep the data that's going across the pipe light, while being able to still have that rich functionality that some of these models bring.
So 2025, 26, we'll probably start seeing more of that, probably pushing images to the edge.
Yeah, we're doing a project right now with a retailer, but that retailer is pretty innovative. So they're usually ahead of the curve. So I would see this happening more in bulk. Yeah, probably two-ish years out.
Got it. While we're talking about devices, I think the next category we talked about was new mobile devices, new handhelds. There was definitely not as many as past events. I feel like a lot of stuff was announced at Modex. But what did you see? What stood out to you around the mobile device landscape?
Yeah, not many, like, air quotes, new devices, but you're starting to see more players come into the mobility space. Maybe not germane for this podcast, but I'll mention it anyway. I know you and I talked about like the next generation of these payment devices are Android, and so you're starting to see some companies that weren't historically creating mobile devices, like your Elos, your Genicos, now creating mobile devices that could compete in this space. But you see Zebra still, I think, leading with the an innovation standpoint. Last Modex, which was 2 years ago, they announced the WS50 device, which is like the really small device, which is really kind of a wearable that's just big enough to be called a wearable, but you also get some screen and real estate to understand what's going on, so you get some better real estate there. So an updated version of that, but then an updated version of their WT series, right? So now they're bringing in more options, more flavors. So I can have a WT that has the screen capabilities of a TC5 device or TC21 or 2X device, but I don't have to strap that full mobile computer on my wrist. I can have it at a WT level, still remain light and flexible, and have the interface with the accessories and keep it light. So that's exciting to see.
Yeah, I love the screen format of the new device too. It's a lot bigger, especially if it's without making it the actual device bigger. The screen is much bigger from a real estate standpoint. So
much bigger, better, more pixel density, just a better screen, like all in all.
Yeah. The other thing, I guess we talked about what we didn't see or what we might have expected to see just based on previous Modex or ProMats. I think the first one that stood out to me was no blockchain. Nobody's touting blockchain anymore.
Yeah, I mean, AI is sucking up all the new technology airspace there is, especially when you think about Gen AI, generative AI. But yeah, no blockchain. Although there are some use cases it can solve for. A good API and a good database, will do the same thing with less complexity, will run faster, easier to deploy and manage, a larger variety of resource pool to pull from. Why not go there, or at least start there? Blockchain has its, solid use cases in the warehouse. Maybe not so much as for a full implementation, but I could see it participating on a very specific block in a larger blockchain implementation.
Yeah, I feel like in pharmaceutical manufacturing or cannabis, it's definitely useful to have that accountability and traceability. You mentioned AI. To me, it felt like AI actually, there was nobody selling AI products. It was more of, it's a thing that's just ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on that AI as a product versus AI as the underpinnings or pipe that runs everything?
As a problem solver, I'm excited to see this because it means that companies and customers are understanding that maybe we need to step away from the technology and think about the problem and how do you solve it, and then figure out how does technology solve that. And so since you're not just throwing AI at everything, with the AI hammer, everything becomes a nail, and it's becoming a bit ubiquitous in products, meaning that it's powering some of the decision making, some of the forecasting, some of the advanced features in these products. And you don't talk about it as AI, you're talking about the problem that you're actually solving. I get excited about that because now it's less noise. I was about to curse on here, but less noise, out there that you have to compete with or talk through or talk pass.
Yeah, less garbage. Fill in the blank for the word he's going to use. The next thing I think you categorize this as like things we didn't see, but I think the bigger group is like plant or facilities. And for me, the first thing that stood out is there's a lot of talk about sustainability, about how to do a better job with using less power in facilities. You mentioned even like shutting lights off in certain spots where you're not using parts of the facility, but I didn't see a lot around solar or alternate power. There was definitely some power companies or power management, but there wasn't a ton about that. Any thoughts on that one?
When you brought this up, I thought that it deserved to live like in a different conference, but at the same time, Georgia Power, Southern Company, headquarters being 4 miles away from this, you could have had a presence. You could have talked about that, but yeah, it gets into the larger infrastructure question around the building and not necessarily what's happening in the building. I feel like a lot of Modex is what happens in the building. How do I move product? How do I move humans? How do I keep people safe? How do I have better equipment? Not necessarily how do I have the best building or infrastructure. But I mean, I think it would have been a great opportunity to talk about some of the things or some of the innovations that a company like Georgia Power would have had that could have been easy to demonstrate with that conference being in their backyard.
Yeah, and I think within the plant space or infrastructure space, you also mentioned that there wasn't a ton about LTE or private LTE inside the four walls or in the yard.
Yeah, that goes back to AI sucking up all the airspace of just anything that's new, especially anything that's new that's part of an existing technology, like private 5G. I think having that is going to become like important, especially you have even more endpoints and connection points, especially with some of these robot manufacturers. They want to run on their like own network and make sure that they're not going to hit anybody, that they can do updates, that they can provide you the best customer service. So it's going to be interesting how you strike a balance between that communication and how things communicate in a warehouse and facility as you have just more and more things crowding that space, that Wi-Fi space, that cellular space.
Got it. And the last thing you listed on our list was no juggling robots. So I know there was previous. Was it NRF or Modex where they had a robot actually juggling?
Modex, and then I think we saw the same one like a ProMat. So I'd say less gimmicky robots doing things for the sake of doing it versus like actually showing off, like solving problems and thinking differently outside the box, like that one sorting robot that did a little bit of customer service. So like I said, like as these tools get better, you can actually start to tie them to problems, and then I think then it's going to become easier because it's going to become table stakes for this to be baked into a larger cloud or technology consumption plan.
Got it. You heard it from Richard first. Focus on the problem, then worry about the robots.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Richard, thank you for walking through these with me today. Appreciate it. And for those out there listening or watching, please like or subscribe. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@bluefletch.com. Thank you.
Thank you.